I have to admit something. As an occupational safety professional and a researcher, I feel legally obligated to be somewhat serious and analytical. But underneath that, I possess a deeply ingrained, almost pathological need to deliver terrible puns. I'm not sure when or how it started, but my team has this tradition. We take turns sharing a dad joke at the very beginning of every Monday morning meeting. The idea, I'm sure, is just to break the ice, set a good tone for the week, and maybe get a few groans before we dive into the work plan. Well, last week, our research manager shared a link to an article from The Telegraph titled, "Even Science Can't Make My Dad Jokes Funny." The author of the article, George Chesterton, was basically lamenting the fact that no matter how hard he tries, his teenagers refuse to laugh at his jokes. He referenced a brand new study from the University of North Carolina that supposedly evaluated 32,500 dad jokes to mathematically prove what makes them funny. Of course, George didn't link the actual study in his article, he just summarized it and moved on to complaining about his kids. So I had to go digging, and I mean real digging. It turns out this study hasn't even been fully published or peer reviewed yet. The media picked up a preprint, a working draft that is floating around online. So, since it hasn't been officially peer reviewed, we are going to do it for them. Let's look at the data science of dad jokes. It's an all new Prove It To Me. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Prove It To Me. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Law. Today, we are taking a much needed break from the heavy neuroscience that probably put half of you to sleep last week. Today, we are talking about humor, specifically the highly irritating, deeply endearing genre known as the dad joke. The preprint we are looking at today is titled "What's Brown and Sticky?" Peering into the ineluctable comedic mystery of dad humor with a handful of machine learning models, hundreds of humans, and tens of thousands of dad jokes. It was written by Paul J. Sylvia from the UNC Greensboro and Mariel I. Burnett from UMass Amherst. Now, before we look at the data, the authors do a fantastic job of defining what actually constitutes a dad joke. It's not just any joke a father tells. It has a specific structural anatomy. The structure. They are compact, usually two sentences, often using a question-answer framing or a riddle format. The content. They are clean, inclusive, and non-offensive. They explicitly avoid politics, religion, sex, and violence. They usually revolve around mundane settings, family members, or animals. The devices. This is where the magic happens. Dad jokes rely heavily on puns, homonyms, and homophones, and literalization, taking a figurative idiom and treating it as a literal truth. For example, I'm having a hard time deciding whether I should throw away my old pillow. I think I'll sleep on it. So, how did the researchers evaluate the funniness of these jokes? They did it in 3 stages. For study 1, the researchers went straight to the source, Reddit, specifically the R Dad Jokes subreddit. They used Python to scrape massive amounts of data from the site, pulling in over 32,500 individual joke posts. They used ridge regression models, a type of machine learning, to code the jokes based on text features like word count, readability, and semantic similarity, and topic features like characters, settings, and themes. They then tried to predict how successful the joke would be based on how many upvotes and comments it got on Reddit. The results were okay. They found that jokes were less likely to bomb if they had high lexical diversity, were more concrete, and had longer setups. But predicting upvotes is a really coarse metric. A lot of Reddit users just lurk and never vote. So, for study 2, they brought in actual humans. They curated a subset of 501 dad jokes and asked 621 adults to rate them on a scale of funniness. This is where the data gets interesting. The researchers found two massive linguistic predictors for how funny humans found the jokes. Number one, semantic distance. Jokes were rated funnier when the setup and the punchline had a greater semantic distance, meaning the punchline came from a completely different conceptual zip code than the setup. Number two, concreteness. Jokes were funnier when the language was concrete and easy to visualize. They also found a weird structural quirk. Jokes were rated less funny when the punchline ended with a question mark. If you are trying to write a good dad joke, the science says make the concepts extremely different, use highly visual and concrete language, and end on a definitive statement, not a question. Finally, for study 3, they flipped the data to look at the people rating the jokes. Who actually enjoys this brand of agonizing wordplay? They surveyed the 621 adults on their demographics, personality traits, and social attitudes. The people who found dad jokes the funniest fell into two distinct clusters. Number one, the cultural conventionality cluster. People who enjoyed the jokes were more likely to be parents, more educated, more agreeable, conscientious, conservative, and religious. They were also more likely to identify strongly as a cat person or a dog person. This makes sense. Dad jokes are, by definition, safe and wholesome. They appeal to a mainstream conventional demographic. Number two, the social boldness cluster. This was the surprising one. People who liked the jokes also scored higher on the need for uniqueness, social dominance, and lower on honesty and humility. The authors suggest that this is because dad jokes are inherently pedantic. They are passive-aggressive anti-humor designed to make the listener groan. If you enjoy manipulating social situations to make yourself the center of attention while mildly irritating everyone around you, you probably love dad jokes. And yes, they did run the data. Statistically speaking, dads actually do find dad jokes funnier than everyone else. Okay, let's put our peer reviewer hats on, because remember, the Telegraph wrote a whole article about this, but it hasn't actually passed formal academic peer review yet. So, limitation 1, the Reddit echo chamber. The authors trained their machine learning models on 32,500 jokes from Reddit. Reddit is not real life. The demographic of a heavy Reddit user skews heavily male, younger, and highly engaged in internet culture. Using Reddit upvotes as the baseline metric for joke success is deeply flawed if you are trying to extrapolate that to the general population. A joke that kills on our dad jokes might result in a blank stare at a family barbecue in Ohio. Limitation number 2, hypercube subsampling and curation bias. For study 2, they used a process called Latin hypercube sampling to whittle the 32,500 jokes down to 600. Then they manually curated it down to 501 by filtering out vulgar, dark, and edgy jokes to fit the definition of a dad joke. This introduces massive researcher bias. The researchers are essentially deciding what counts as a dad joke before testing it. If you manually sanitize the dataset to only include wholesome jokes, you can't be surprised when Study 3 reveals that wholesome conventional people like the jokes the most. You engineered the outcome with your filtering criteria. Limitation number 3, the danger of preprints. This isn't a limitation of the study itself, but rather a warning about media literacy. This study was uploaded to the Open Science Framework as an unpublished preprint. This happens a lot in academia. Researchers will post their working drafts to get feedback from peers before formal submission. But lazy journalists trawl these preprint servers looking for punchy headlines. The Telegraph ran a story treating this as settled science. If the peer reviewers tear this methodology apart, say, pointing out the exact curation bias I just mentioned, and the study gets rejected, the public will never know. The headline is already out there. As safety professionals, if you see an article citing a recent study, check to see if it is actually published in a journal, or if it is just a preprint floating in the ether. So, how does a study about dad jokes apply to occupational safety and health? Well, actually, there is a brilliant communication takeaway hidden in Study 2. The researchers found that concreteness was a massive predictor of joke success. Concreteness represents a text's relative abstraction. Concrete texts are easier to imagine, visualize, and understand. When we communicate safety, we're terrible at this. We use massive, abstract, bureaucratic language. We tell workers to maintain situational awareness and utilize appropriate hazard mitigation protocols. That is a completely abstract, dead sentence. If you want your safety training to stick, if you want it to land the same way a good punchline lands, you have to use concrete language. Instead of ensure proper ergonomics during material handling, say, keep the box close to your belly button and move your feet instead of twisting your spine. Concrete language forces the brain to visualize the action. It strips away the corporate jargon and leaves the worker with a clear, immediate understanding of the expectation. If it works for making a terrible pun memorable, it will work for keeping your crew alive. Now that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Sometimes you just have to step back, look at a ridiculous dataset, and appreciate the fact that someone actually spent grant money analyzing 30,000 puns on the internet. I'll link the Telegraph article and the original preprint study in the show notes so you can read the methodology and a few of the terrible jokes for yourself. If you got something out of today's conversation, please take a second to rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It truly is the best way to help other safety professionals find the show. If you have a safety topic that you want me to tackle, or if you just want to send me your absolute worst dad joke, shoot me an email at contact@proveitpod.com. Stay safe, keep your communications concrete, and I'll catch you on the next one. But before you go, I have a little treat for you. Good morning. In less than an hour, podcast listeners here will join others from around the world, and you will be launching the largest consumption of trivial research in the history of mankind. Mankind. That word should have new meaning for all of us today. We can't be consumed by our petty differences anymore. We will be united in our common interests. Perhaps it's fate that today is the 4th of July, and you will once again be listening for our freedom. Not from tyranny, oppression, or persecution, but from poor research practices and terrible dad jokes. We're fighting for our right to live, to exist, and should we win the day, the 4th of July will no longer be known as an American holiday, but as the day when the world declared in one voice, we will not go quietly into the night, we will not endure cringy humor and misleading headlines without a fight. We're going to live on.
we're going to survive. Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.
Happy 250, America. Prove It To Me is produced by me, Matt Law. Original music by Wes London. You can find this podcast on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Like what you've heard so far? Please like, subscribe, and follow wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Got questions about what we talked about or research that you want to share? Send an email to contact@proveitpod.com. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and its guests and do not necessarily represent the official position, opinion, or strategies of their employers or companies. Examples of research and data analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based on very limited, often single use case, and sometimes dated information. Assumptions made within this discussion about research and data analyses are not necessarily representative of the position of the host, the guests, or their employers or companies. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast. The presentation of the content by the guests does not necessarily constitute an active endorsement of the content by the host.